The classroom buzzed with chatter as the morning bell rang. Mr. Henderson, the science teacher, adjusted his glasses and tapped on his desk. "All right, class, settle down. We have a new student joining us today." The room quieted, and all eyes turned to the boy standing near the door. He had messy brown hair, oversized glasses, and clutched a worn-out backpack. "His name was Ethan Parker. Ethan just moved here, so let's make him feel welcome," Mr. Henderson said. "Why don't you introduce yourself?" Ethan swallowed nervously, then took a deep breath. Hi. My name's Ethan. I like astronomy, and my dad works at NASA." For a second, there was silence. Then came the laughter, and a boy in the back row, Ryan Carter, smirked. "Yeah, right. And my dad's the president." The class erupted into more giggles. Ethan's face turned red. He opened his mouth to explain, but the murmurs of disbelief had already started. "NASA? No way. He's totally making that up." Ethan looked at the teacher for help, but Mr. Henderson only sighed. He had seen kids exaggerate before, and this was nothing new. Ryan leaned back in his chair. "If your dad works at NASA, why aren't you living in some fancy place? You don't look like a NASA kid." Ethan clenched his fists under his desk. He wanted to defend himself, but he knew words wouldn't be enough. He needed proof, and soon enough, the proof was going to walk right through that door. Lunch break arrived, but for Ethan, it felt like anything but a break. He sat alone at the far end of the cafeteria, poking at his food while whispers filled the air around him. "Did you hear the new kid?" one girl muttered. "He actually thinks his dad works at NASA." "Such a liar," another boy scoffed. "If his dad worked at NASA, he'd be, like, super smart. But look at him, he's just some nerd." Ethan gritted his teeth. He had heard it all before. Moving from school to school, he had learned that people always judged before they knew the truth. But this time, it stung more. Ryan and his group strutted over to Ethan's table, their trays clattering against the metal. "So, NASA boy," Ryan sneered, taking a bite of his sandwich. "What does your dad do there? Fly rockets?" Ethan sighed. "No, he's an engineer. He works on spacecraft designs." Ryan smirked. "Oh, so he just draws spaceships? That's it?" Ethan's hands tightened around his fork. "It's a lot more complicated than that." Ryan leaned in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Right. And I'm guessing he's best friends with the astronauts, too." The table burst into laughter. Ethan's stomach twisted, but he refused to let them see how much it hurt. "Maybe he's just making it up for attention," a girl whispered to her friend. Ethan pushed his tray away. He didn't have to prove anything to these people. But deep down, a thought nagged at him. What if they never believed him until they saw it for themselves? And that moment was coming sooner than anyone expected. The school day dragged on, but the whispers never stopped. Every time Ethan walked past a group of students, he could feel their eyes on him, their smirks, their quiet chuckles. By the time science class rolled around, he was exhausted. But things were about to get worse. Mr. Collins, the science teacher, had just finished explaining the laws of motion when Ryan raised his hand. "Hey, Mr. Collins, I have a question," he said, glancing over at Ethan with a smirk. Mr. Collins adjusted his glasses. "Go ahead, Ryan." Ryan leaned back in his chair, feigning innocence. "Since we're talking about space and all, maybe NASA boy can explain how rockets work? You know, since his dad is an engineer there." The class snickered. Ethan felt his face heat up. He knew this wasn't a real question, it was a setup. If he got something wrong, it would only make the rumors worse. Mr. Collins, unaware of the teasing, turned to Ethan. "Actually, that's a great idea. Ethan, would you like to share?" Ethan took a deep breath. He could either back down or prove he wasn't just making things up. "Sure," he said, sitting up straighter. "Rockets work using Newton's third law of motion. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. The engines burn fuel, creating thrust, which pushes the rocket forward." A few students looked surprised. Even Mr. Collins raised an eyebrow, but Ryan wasn't done. Yeah, anyone can Google that. If your dad really works at NASA, prove it. Bring him here. The room went silent. All eyes were on Ethan. Ethan clenched his jaw. He hadn't wanted to involve his dad, but now? Now, he had no choice. Fine, Ethan said. Tomorrow, you'll see for yourself. Ryan grinned, thinking he had won. But he had no idea what was coming next. The moment Ethan agreed to bring his dad, a wave of excitement spread through the classroom. Whispers filled the air, students nudging each other, already anticipating tomorrow's showdown. Tomorrow, huh? Ryan said, leaning forward with a smirk. Can't wait to meet NASA Dad. Ethan forced himself to stay calm, but inside, his heart pounded. He had no idea if his dad would even agree to this. But backing down wasn't an option anymore. As soon as the bell rang, he grabbed his backpack and rushed home, his mind spinning. How was he even going to explain this to his father? When he walked into the house, his dad was in his usual spot, at his desk, surrounded by blueprints and NASA documents. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. Dad, I need your help. His father looked up, adjusting his glasses. Of course, son. What's up? Ethan hesitated, then spilled everything, the joke, the challenge, the humiliation. His father listened carefully, nodding at each part of the story. When Ethan finished, there was a long silence. So, his dad finally said, a small smile playing on his lips, you want me to show up at your school? Ethan nodded. Yeah. I mean, only if you're not busy or anything. His father stood up, stretching his arms. Oh, I'm definitely busy, he said, his voice teasing. But for this? I think I can make time. Ethan's eyes widened. Wait, really? His father grinned. Absolutely. Let's show them what NASA engineers are really made of. Ethan felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Tomorrow was going to be legendary. The next morning, Ethan could barely sit still. His hands were clammy, his stomach in knots. His dad had left early, promising to meet him at school just before class. Ethan wasn't sure what to expect, but one thing was certain, today, everything would change. As soon as he walked into the classroom, all eyes turned to him. Ryan was already waiting, his arms crossed, that same cocky smirk on his face. Well, Ryan said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Where's Mr. NASA? Did he have a mission to Mars today? Laughter rippled through the class. Ethan clenched his fists but refused to react. Instead, he simply took his seat. Minutes felt like hours as the morning dragged on. Then, just before the final bell of the period, a voice crackled through the school's intercom. Ethan Parker, please come to the front office. Your father has arrived. A hush fell over the classroom. Ethan stood, his heart pounding as he walked toward the door. The moment he stepped into the hallway, curious whispers followed him. Ryan and a few of his friends exchanged amused glances before slipping out of their seats to watch from the doorway. As Ethan turned the corner, he saw him. His father stood in the office, dressed in his official NASA jumpsuit, the iconic blue fabric bearing patches from multiple space missions. A lanyard with his identification badge hung around his neck, and in his hands, he held a sleek black case. The receptionist looked stunned. Mr. Parker, wow. I mean, welcome to our school. Ethan's father smiled. Glad to be here. Ethan couldn't help but grin. This was going to be even better than he had imagined. Ethan's heart pounded as he stepped toward his father, feeling the weight of 100 eyes watching him. The students who had gathered near the door whispered among themselves, nudging each other in disbelief. Even Ryan, the loudest of them all, stood frozen. Ethan's father turned to him with a warm smile. Ready, kid? He asked, his voice calm yet commanding. Ethan nodded, and together they walked toward the classroom. As they entered, the teacher's eyes widened, and she quickly cleared her throat. Class, it seems we have a very special visitor today. The room was dead silent. No one laughed. No one whispered. Every student sat upright, eyes fixed on the tall man in the NASA flight suit. Ryan, who had been the loudest skeptic, looked like he had swallowed a rock. Ethan's dad set down his black case on the teacher's desk and looked around. "I hear there's been some debate about my job," he said with a chuckle. His voice was strong yet friendly, carrying the weight of someone who had seen things most people could only dream of. No one dared to speak. Even the teacher looked nervous. "Well," Ethan's dad continued, "I thought I'd take a little time today to talk about what I do at NASA. But first," he clicked open the latches on the black case, and with a swift motion, lifted the lid. The entire class leaned forward. Inside the case, resting on a velvet cushion, was something that instantly stole the breath from everyone in the room, an actual piece of moon rock. Gasps filled the air. A few students even stood up for a closer look. Ethan glanced at Ryan, whose mouth hung open, his earlier arrogance completely shattered. This was just the beginning. Ethan's dad lifted the small, dark gray rock from the case, holding it up between his fingers. "This," he said, his voice steady, "is over 3.8 billion years old. It traveled hundreds of thousands of miles through space before landing in my hands." The class remained frozen, their eyes locked on the moon rock. Even the teacher leaned in slightly, adjusting her glasses as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Ethan felt a sense of pride bubbling inside him. All those times he had been laughed at, dismissed, made to feel like he was making things up, none of that mattered now. His father wasn't just proving them wrong. He was making them believe. Ryan, who had been the loudest to mock Ethan, finally found his voice. That's real," he stammered. Ethan's dad smiled. "Absolutely. You want to see something even cooler?" He reached into the case again and pulled out a pair of thick white gloves. "These are the same kind astronauts wear when handling moon samples. Who wants to try?" Hands shot up instantly. Even the students who had laughed the hardest were desperate to be picked. Ethan's dad handed the gloves to the teacher first, who carefully slid them on, her hands trembling slightly. She lifted the moon rock from its case with the same reverence one would give a priceless treasure. This is incredible," she whispered. One by one, students got their turn. As Ryan held the rock in his gloved hands, his expression was unreadable. He looked up at Ethan, something shifting behind his eyes. For the first time, it wasn't mockery. It was respect. As Ryan held the moon rock in his gloved hands, a hush fell over the classroom. The same kid who had laughed the hardest at Ethan now looked like he had just touched a piece of history, because he had. His fingers trembled slightly, his cocky smirk long gone. Ethan watched, his heart pounding. Would Ryan still find a way to twist this into a joke? Would he shrug it off, call it fake? But what happened next stunned everyone. Ryan carefully placed the rock back into its case and turned toward Ethan. He hesitated for a moment, then cleared his throat. I guess I was wrong," he muttered, just loud enough for the whole class to hear. The words sent a ripple through the room. Even the teacher raised an eyebrow, surprised. Ryan never admitted he was wrong. Ever. Ethan blinked. Had he actually heard that right? Ryan scratched the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "I mean, I thought you were just making stuff up. But your dad is actually," he motioned toward Ethan's father, who stood there with a knowing smile. "NASA? That's insane." The tension in the room shifted. It wasn't just about Ryan anymore. The entire class, all the kids who had giggled and whispered behind Ethan's back, now looked at him with new eyes. The laughter had turned to curiosity. "So, what's it like having a dad who works at NASA?" one kid finally asked. Ethan grinned. "You really want to know?" Heads nodded eagerly. For the first time, he wasn't the kid everyone doubted. He was the kid everyone wanted to listen to. Ethan glanced at his dad, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, he turned to the class. "It's incredible," Ethan began. "I mean, imagine knowing people who've actually been to space. People who've seen Earth from up there." He pointed toward the ceiling, as if it were the sky itself. "My dad works with astronauts. He helps build the technology that sends them beyond our world." The class hung onto every word. Even Ryan, who had spent most of the year rolling his eyes at Ethan's space talk, now looked like he actually cared. Mr. Walker, their teacher, stepped forward. Ethan's father has generously agreed to share some of his knowledge with us today. And, he gestured toward the briefcase. He's brought something truly special. Ethan's dad placed the case on the desk and opened it fully. Inside, besides the moon rock, were photographs, patches from space missions, and even a small, metallic object that looked like a piece of a spacecraft. This, Ethan's father said, holding up the fragment, is from an actual rocket that went to space. Gasps echoed around the room. Even kids who had barely paid attention in science class now leaned forward, eyes wide with awe. Wait, so this touched space? One student asked. Ethan's dad nodded. That's right. And the moon rock? It's over 3 billion years old. The weight of that number silenced the room. For the first time, these kids weren't just students in a classroom. They were explorers, staring into the vastness of the universe through a tiny, ancient stone, and for Ethan, this moment was everything. The classroom was utterly silent. Ethan stood beside his father, watching his classmates process everything they had just seen. The moon rock, the piece of the spacecraft, the stories about NASA, it was as if their entire understanding of space had shifted in an instant. Even Ryan, the loudest skeptic, finally spoke up. But his voice wasn't mocking this time. It was quiet. Almost respectful. That's actually really cool, he admitted. I didn't know NASA did all that. Ethan smiled. There's a lot people don't know. But space isn't just for astronauts, it's for anyone who dreams big enough. His dad placed a hand on his shoulder, proud. That's right. The future of space exploration isn't just with NASA. It's with all of you. One of you might be the next person to walk on Mars. The class murmured excitedly. Some of them had never even considered the possibility before. But now? Now, the universe seemed closer than ever. As the lesson wrapped up, Mr. Walker gave Ethan's dad a heartfelt thanks. I think you've just inspired the next generation of scientists, engineers, and explorers. When Ethan and his dad left the classroom, something felt different. The laughter that had once followed him whenever he mentioned NASA was gone. In its place was something even greater, respect, and as he stepped outside, looking up at the sky, Ethan knew one thing for sure, his dreams were no longer something to hide, they were something to chase. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more incredible stories. What do you think about Ethan's journey? Let us know in the comments below, and remember, never let anyone make you feel small for dreaming big. Who knows? One day, it might be you proving them wrong.